I still remember that chilling moment as if it were yesterday. The moment when everything went horribly, disastrously wrong at my sister's wedding reception. There I was, standing in the middle of a crowded hall, stripped down to nothing but my boxer briefs, my skin cold and clammy from the unexpected plunge into the shallow, icy water. The sound of splashing and gasps filled the air as I stared in disbelief, feeling every ounce of embarrassment burning like a wildfire across my face. In that surreal instant, time seemed to slow down. I could almost hear my heart pounding louder than the frantic chatter around me. I wanted nothing more than to vanish, to blend into the background and escape the piercing stares and whispered judgments of strangers and family alike. My name is Chris, and though I've always thought of myself as a composed and reliable guy, that day shattered every illusion I had of control. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew each other's business, I had learned early on to keep my head down and avoid drawing attention. But weddings, with their unpredictable mix of joy, tension, and chaos, have a way of exposing even the most well-guarded vulnerabilities. I had been the designated drone operator for my sister's wedding, a responsibility I took great pride in, believing it would add a touch of modern magic to the celebration. I had envisioned sweeping aerial shots of the ceremony, the laughter of guests mingling with the gentle hum of nature, and moments of unspoken beauty captured from above. However, nature had other plans that day. It all began when I set out with my trusty drone, determined to capture the perfect moment as the bride walked down the aisle. The weather had been unpredictable, and a mischievous gust of wind turned what should have been a smooth flight into a frantic battle for control. I remember the moment vividly. 1 second, my drone was gliding gracefully above the reception, and the next, it was caught in a sudden, fierce windstorm. Before I could react, it careened wildly off course, its sensors overwhelmed by the relentless force of nature. I chased after it, heart racing, as it zigzagged between trees and decorations, until it finally made a disastrous dive toward the edge of a small ornamental pond. As if that weren't enough, fate decided to add insult to injury. In my desperate attempt to rescue my runaway drone, I found myself slipping on the wet grass. In a split second, I tumbled, and the unthinkable happened. I ended up falling directly into the shallow water, stripping away not only the dignity I had so carefully preserved, but also forcing me into an impromptu and utterly humiliating state of undress. The shock of cold water against my skin, mixed with the roar of laughter from onlookers, left me paralyzed for a heartbeat before I scrambled to cover myself. I can still hear the voices around me, a mix of concern, amusement, and disbelief. "Dude, are you serious?" one guest had blurted out, while another whispered, "I've never seen anything like this before." Even my sister, who had been radiant moments before in her wedding gown, now wore a look that mingled shock with a hint of sympathy, her eyes darting between me and the unfolding chaos. In that moment, I felt exposed, not just physically, but emotionally. Every secret, every insecurity, laid bare under the harsh glare of reality and the merciless laughter of strangers. In the midst of this chaos, I managed to hear a soft, almost comforting voice cutting through the din. It was Rachel, my sister's longtime friend and the wedding coordinator, known for her cool demeanor and uncanny ability to manage even the most unruly situations. "Chris, come on, get it together," she had said, her tone both gentle and commanding. Her words, though meant to steady me, only served to intensify my sense of failure. I scrambled towards a nearby curtain, pulling it around me as if it could shield me from the world, all the while feeling my heart sink deeper with every passing second. That incident, as absurd and mortifying as it was, marked the beginning of a series of events that would redefine my understanding of weddings, family, and my own resilience. Over the years, I had witnessed my fair share of wedding mishaps, from the unexpected change of venues at the last minute to bitter family feuds erupting over trivial matters. Yet nothing had prepared me for this personal debacle. Standing there, half hidden behind a makeshift curtain, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a strange, piercing clarity. I knew that I had to confront not only the immediate humiliation, but also the deeper, underlying issues that had long haunted me. The need to be seen as competent, the fear of vulnerability, and the relentless pressure to be the perfect brother, friend, and dutiful family member. As the initial shock began to subside, I retreated into a quiet corner of my mind, recalling every moment that led me to that point. I remembered the countless hours spent perfecting the drone settings, the excited chatter with my sister about how the aerial footage would make her wedding album unforgettable, and the genuine pride I felt in contributing something unique to the celebration. Now, all of that seemed like a cruel joke. A reminder that no matter how much I planned or prepared, life had a way of turning the best-laid plans into a spectacle of chaos and vulnerability. After that fateful fall, I took a few deep, trembling breaths and tried to collect myself. I could still hear Rachel's voice echoing in my ears, urging me to salvage what was left of the day. With every step I took towards the exit, I felt a mix of determination and resignation. A determination to learn from the experience, and a resignation to the fact that sometimes, even the most meticulously planned moments can spiral out of control. I knew that this incident would haunt me for a long time, but I also sensed that it was a turning point, a moment that forced me to confront my imperfections head-on. As I slowly made my way back inside, my thoughts drifted to the people around me, the family members sharing awkward glances, the guests trying to stifle their laughter, and the underlying current of pity in the eyes of those who cared. In that moment, I realized that weddings, with all their splendor and chaos, were not just celebrations of love and unity, but also arenas where the raw, unfiltered truths of our lives were exposed. I had become unwillingly part of a narrative that was both hilarious and heart-wrenching. A narrative that would be recounted with a mix of laughter and sorrow for years to come. I had always prided myself on being someone who could handle pressure, who could rise above embarrassing moments without letting them define me. But that day, I was forced to acknowledge the fragility of my carefully constructed persona. As I stood there, vulnerable and exposed, I made a silent vow to myself. A vow to embrace every moment, no matter how painful or humiliating, and to use it as a stepping stone towards becoming a stronger, more authentic version of who I was meant to be. The rest of the evening unfolded like a blur, conversations that felt both surreal and poignant, moments of unexpected kindness from strangers who had witnessed my fall, and a lingering sense of introspection that I carried with me long after the laughter had died down. It was in those moments of quiet reflection that I began to understand the deeper meaning behind the chaos of that day. What had initially seemed like a humiliating accident was, in fact, a catalyst for change, a harsh lesson in the art of resilience, vulnerability, and the unpredictable nature of life itself. Even now, as I look back on that day, I can still feel the chill of that water and the sting of every mocking laugh. Yet, I also see it as the moment that forced me to confront my deepest insecurities and to begin the long journey of self-acceptance. This is just the beginning of my story, a story filled with unexpected twists, heartbreaking moments, and the kind of raw, unfiltered emotions that make life both unbearable and beautiful. I spent the rest of that night in a daze, huddled in a quiet corner away from the cacophony of wedding chatter and clumsy laughter. Once the initial shock subsided, I managed to slip away from the reception and find refuge in one of the unused rooms of the venue. The silence there was deafening compared to the chaos I had just experienced. I sat on a rickety chair, wrapping my arms around myself as I replayed every moment in my head. The drone's frantic flight, the sudden slip, the shock of icy water, and the crushing humiliation of being stripped down in front of everyone. Each recollection was like a shard of glass, cutting deeper into the fragile parts of my ego that I had spent years building up. I remembered how Rachel's voice had sliced through the noise. "Chris, come on, get it together." Even though her words were meant to help, they only amplified my feelings of inadequacy. I couldn't help but wonder if I had ever truly been prepared for life's unpredictable twists. All my meticulous planning, the endless adjustments and precautions I'd taken, seemed futile in the face of nature's whimsy. That night, I realized that vulnerability wasn't something I could simply hide behind or fix with technology. It was an inescapable part of being human the next morning. I woke up with a dull ache not just in my body, but also in my heart. The memory of the previous day's debacle loomed large in my mind, and I dreaded facing everyone again. Yet, as the first rays of light filtered through the thin curtains of the recovery room, I knew I had no choice but to confront the fallout. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling, and made my way to the small dining area where a few early risers were gathering. There, I saw my sister, Lisa, sitting quietly with a cup of coffee in hand, her eyes red from crying and exhaustion. "Hey, Chris," she said softly as I approached, her voice a fragile mixture of concern and regret. "I'm so sorry about last night. I know it wasn't exactly what you expected." Her tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried an unspoken apology for the entire series of unfortunate events that had turned what should have been a joyous day into a public spectacle. I sat down beside her, still feeling the weight of embarrassment, yet also the comfort of her understanding presence. "I'm sorry too, Lisa," I replied, my voice wavering. I feel like I failed everyone. I was supposed to capture all the beauty of the day, not become the day's biggest disaster." I could see the hurt in her eyes, mingled with sympathy. She reached out and squeezed my hand, a silent gesture that somehow made the crushing loneliness a bit more bearable. Later that morning, as I tried to piece together the shattered remnants of my pride, I received a text from Jake, an old friend and fellow drone enthusiast. His message was simple. "Dude, I heard about what happened. Want to grab some coffee and talk it out?" The invitation, casual as it might seem, felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in my struggles. I agreed, and soon found myself sitting in a cozy downtown cafe with Jake. Over steaming mugs of coffee, I recounted the events in painstaking detail, my words tumbling out in a mix of raw emotion and reluctant humor. "Man, that sounds brutal," Jake said, shaking his head in disbelief. "But you know, sometimes these moments are exactly what we need to learn. I mean, look at it this way. You'll have one hell of a story to tell someday." His attempt at lightening the mood made me crack a small smile, though the sting of the experience still lingered. We spent hours dissecting every detail. The technical glitch with the drone, the miscalculation that led to my slip, and even the overzealous gust of wind that turned everything upside down. Jake's insights and encouragement helped me see that, despite the humiliation, there was an opportunity to grow from this mishap. As the day progressed, I began to notice small gestures of kindness from unexpected corners. A distant relative, who I'd always seen as stern and unyielding, approached me with a quiet apology and a half smile that said, "We've all been there." Even some of the guests who had laughed earlier now offered gentle words of encouragement, acknowledging that while the incident was undeniably embarrassing, it was also a reminder that perfection is a myth. These moments of genuine human connection slowly started to mend the cracks in my shattered self-image. I decided that day to confront not just the immediate embarrassment, but the deeper issues that had been festering within me for years: the relentless need to be flawless, the fear of being vulnerable, and the suffocating pressure to always be the competent one. I wrote a long, messy journal entry later that evening, pouring out every thought and feeling, unfiltered and raw. I reflected on my childhood in our small town, where every misstep was magnified and gossip spread like wildfire. I remembered how I'd always tried to be the reliable one, the person who could be counted on in every crisis, and how that expectation had slowly turned into a self-imposed burden. In that quiet solitude, with only the hum of the night to keep me company, I made a silent vow to myself. I promised that I would no longer let the fear of imperfection hold me back. I would embrace my vulnerabilities, learn from every failure, and, above all, be kinder to myself. The incident at the wedding, as mortifying as it had been, was now transforming into a turning point, a catalyst for change that I desperately needed. Over the next few days, I slowly began to rebuild. I reached out to Jake more often, sharing my progress and my setbacks. I even started experimenting with my drone again, this time with a newfound respect for the unpredictable forces of nature. Each flight was a lesson in humility and resilience, a reminder that while technology could sometimes fail, the human spirit had an uncanny ability to adapt and overcome. I also found myself reconnecting with Lisa. Our conversations grew deeper and more honest, no longer clouded by the awkwardness of that disastrous night. She confessed that she had felt a surge of guilt over the unintended consequences of my accident, and I reassured her that I bore no ill will. In fact, I began to see our shared experience as a bridge, one that brought us closer together in our mutual understanding of life's unpredictable twists. One evening, as I was reviewing some new footage on my laptop, footage that, despite a few hiccups, still captured the beauty of the wedding, I realized that I had started to see the humor in my own misfortune. A small smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I watched a particularly clumsy moment of the drone's flight, and I thought, maybe someday I can turn all of this into something positive. Perhaps it could even become a part of my work, a reminder that even in our lowest moments, there is a spark of creativity waiting to be ignited. Yet, beneath the budding optimism, I couldn't shake off the lingering sting of that public humiliation. I often found myself replaying the scene over and over, questioning every decision I had made. But gradually, I began to understand that some moments are meant to challenge us, to force us to confront our limitations, and to grow beyond them. The journey to self-acceptance, I realized, is never linear. It's a series of falls, bruises, and eventually, rises. As I continue to navigate the complexities of my life, I carry with me the memory of that fateful day. It serves as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of my capacity to endure, to learn, and to ultimately transform pain into strength. This chapter of my life, marked by vulnerability and unexpected lessons, is far from over. There are still more challenges ahead, more moments that will test my resolve and reshape my understanding of who I am. But for now, I can at least say that I have taken the first step on a path toward a more authentic, resilient self. I started to see that the days following that fateful wedding marked the beginning of a long, sometimes painful, but ultimately transformative journey. After that pivotal night, I began to explore parts of my inner self that I had long kept hidden. I started attending therapy sessions and joining a small support group for people who had experienced public humiliations or unexpected setbacks. In these sessions, I found solace in sharing my story with others who, like me, had faced moments that threatened to break them. It slowly became clear that vulnerability wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather a doorway to genuine strength. I began to document every raw, unfiltered thought on a blog, a place where I could spill out all the doubts, the anger, and even the moments of unexpected humor that followed my public fall. To my surprise, readers started to resonate with my honesty, and I received messages from strangers telling me that my story helped them see that imperfection was part of the human experience. One sunny afternoon, I decided to meet Emily, a warm and empathetic soul I had met in the support group, at a quiet park near the edge of the city. As we strolled along winding paths under the gentle rustle of autumn leaves, I found myself opening up about the incident, my lingering fears of failure, and the overwhelming pressure I'd always felt to be the one who never faltered. Emily listened intently, her eyes reflecting a depth of compassion that made me feel both seen and understood. She recalled her own story, a series of small, yet painful, missteps that had led her to believe she was unworthy, until she learned to embrace her flaws as markers of growth. Her words, soft and sincere, reminded me that every scar, every embarrassing moment was a step toward becoming more authentic. Over the following weeks, I began to experiment again with my drone, cautiously venturing out on new flights. Each takeoff was accompanied by a mix of excitement and trepidation, a silent challenge to the memories of that humiliating day. I adjusted the settings, double-checked the weather forecast, and even added a few safety measures, all the while reminding myself that perfection was an illusion. Sometimes, as the drone soared over the familiar rooftops and tree-lined streets, I would catch a glimpse of my reflection in its sleek body, a reminder of the man I was, and the man I was slowly becoming. The skies, once filled with the threat of unforeseen gusts, now held a promise of healing and renewal. I also found new meaning in the simple rituals of daily life. Morning coffee, once taken for granted, turned into a meditative pause where I allowed myself to feel each emotion without judgment. I'd sit on my back porch, watching the sun slowly rise, its soft light warming the edges of the darkness that still clung to my memories. Those quiet moments became a ritual of self-forgiveness, a daily reminder that every fall, no matter how public or painful, was an opportunity to rise again. Meanwhile, the blog continued to grow. I received messages from readers who had experienced their own public embarrassments, missed opportunities, awkward encounters, and moments when life didn't go as planned. One message in particular stood out. A young man writing about how he had always been paralyzed by the fear of failure, and how reading about my fall had given him the courage to try again. That message, and many others like it, became the fuel that pushed me to keep writing, to keep sharing, and to keep embracing my journey, no matter how messy it might be. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see the incident not as a single moment of humiliation, but as a series of stepping stones that had reshaped my entire outlook on life. I learned that the sting of public embarrassment could eventually give way to a deep, abiding resilience. A resilience built not in spite of our flaws, but because of them. The world, I realized, was a mosaic of imperfections, and in our shared vulnerability lay the seed of true connection. I continue to move forward, every day, a blend of cautious optimism and hard-won acceptance. My journey is far from over, and I know there will be more falls and more moments of unexpected exposure. Yet, with each setback, I discover new parts of myself, learn new lessons, and inch closer to a version of me that is both real and unafraid. Even now, as I type these words with trembling hands and a hopeful heart. I can feel the weight of that long-ago wedding day transforming into something almost beautiful. A reminder that sometimes the most painful moments are the ones that teach us how to truly live. In the months that followed, I found myself settling into a rhythm that was both familiar and entirely new, a strange blend of acceptance and cautious experimentation. The raw shock of that wedding day had slowly receded, replaced by a steady determination to rebuild what I once thought was lost. Yet, there were moments when the past crept in unexpectedly. A sudden flash of sunlight on the water's surface, a stray comment that echoed with remembered laughter, or even a night when the quiet of my apartment seemed too loud with memories. Those moments were brief, but they reminded me that healing was not a straight line, but rather a jagged path of progress and setbacks. I began to integrate my experiences into my daily life with a newfound openness. Each morning, I made it a ritual to step onto my back porch with a steaming mug of coffee and watch the city wake up. The rising sun painted the sky in gentle hues of orange and pink, and I allowed myself to simply be, to feel the cool morning air, to listen to the soft hum of distant traffic, and to remind myself that every day was a fresh canvas. Sometimes, the beauty of those early moments made me think back to the chaos of that fateful day and smile at how far I'd come, even as I recognized that the scars of humiliation would remain as silent testimonies to my journey. One day, as I was flying my drone again, a cautious, measured attempt compared to the frantic flight of months past, a familiar notification popped up on my phone. It was a message from Emily. We had grown closer since that park day, our conversations evolving from shared vulnerabilities to deeper reflections on life, art, and the unpredictable dance of fate. Her message was simple, yet it carried a warmth that made my heart skip a beat. "Chris, I found an old photo of you with the drone, taken right after that crazy day. I think it captures a spark of something raw and genuine in you. Want to meet up and talk about it over dinner?" The invitation stirred a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was apprehensive. Would revisiting that painful memory reopen old wounds? On the other, I craved connection, a reaffirmation that even the most embarrassing moments could lead to meaningful growth. I replied with a tentative yes, and we arranged to meet at a small bistro downtown known for its intimate ambiance and soulful live music. That evening, as I walked into the dimly lit restaurant, I felt a flutter of nerves that reminded me of the excitement of new beginnings. Emily was already there, seated at a corner table by a window, her eyes alight with gentle curiosity as she looked up from a folded piece of paper. A photo, I assumed. She greeted me with a warm smile that dissolved some of the lingering self-doubt, and we quickly fell into easy conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about that day," Emily said softly as we sipped our wine. "Not just the humiliation, but the beauty in how you handled it afterward. There's something incredibly brave about exposing your vulnerabilities like that." I paused, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. "It was the worst day of my life," I admitted, "but somehow I also feel like it forced me to confront parts of myself I had been too afraid to face. I used to believe that if I could just be perfect, then I wouldn't hurt or embarrass myself. Now I see that being imperfect is what makes us human." Emily nodded, her eyes reflecting both empathy and a deep understanding. "I think that's the turning point for so many of us, when we realize that perfection is an illusion. It's our flaws, our scars, that add depth to our stories. Maybe one day you'll even use your experiences to inspire others." Her words resonated with me long after dinner ended. I began to explore the idea of incorporating my story into my work. After all, I had always been drawn to storytelling, the way narratives could capture the messy, raw essence of life and transform it into something relatable and healing. The blog, which had started as a cathartic outlet, was evolving into a repository of lessons learned from life's unpredictable twists. Back at home, I dedicated more time to my writing. I started drafting a longer piece about the wedding day, not just as a tale of public humiliation, but as a journey of resilience and self-discovery. I poured every emotion onto the page: the surge of anger when I first fell, the bitter taste of embarrassment as I huddled behind that curtain, the quiet despair of waking up the next morning, and finally, the slow, steady climb toward acceptance. As I wrote, I could almost feel the catharsis of releasing each painful memory, transforming it into words that might one day help someone else see that even in our darkest moments, there is light to be found. During one of these late-night writing sessions, I received an unexpected call from Jake. His voice, ever the blend of humor and genuine concern, crackled through the line. "Hey man, I saw your latest blog post. It's raw, it's real, and it's damn inspiring. Have you ever thought about doing a live session? Maybe share your story with a group of people who might be going through something similar?" The idea sparked something within me. I had always been a private person, hesitant to share my most vulnerable moments in a public forum. Yet, the thought of turning my pain into a source of strength for others was deeply compelling. Over the next few weeks, Jake and I brainstormed ideas for a live session, a safe space where people could share their own stories of embarrassment, failure, and recovery without judgment. The day of the live session arrived with an unexpected clarity. I stood in front of a modest audience at a local community center, the air filled with anticipation and a quiet solidarity. As I began to speak, my voice wavered at first, but as I delved deeper into my journey, the fall, the isolation, the slow healing, the room grew silent with empathetic attention. I could see nods of understanding, tear-streaked faces, and even smiles breaking through the solemnity of shared pain. In that moment, I realized that by embracing my imperfections, I was not only healing myself, but I was also lighting the way for others who had felt lost in their own struggles. After the session, people approached me, some to share their own experiences, others simply to say, "Thank you for being so honest." One older gentleman, with a kindly smile and eyes that had seen many battles of life, patted my shoulder and said, "I've carried my share of scars, son. Thank you for showing us that it's okay to be broken sometimes, because that's when we learn to mend." That simple, heartfelt comment stayed with me long after the event ended. I began to see that my story, once a source of deep personal pain, had transformed into a beacon of hope. I continued to host more live sessions, each one a tapestry of shared experiences, laughter, tears, and the kind of deep human connection that only comes when we dare to be vulnerable. Through it all, I found that the more I embraced my flaws, the more I discovered about the beauty of our collective imperfection. As the seasons changed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My blog, once a solitary outlet, blossomed into a vibrant community of voices, each story, no matter how painful, resonating with the truth that we are all, in our own ways, works in progress. I continued to fly my drone, now not just as a means of capturing images from above, but as a metaphor for my life, a journey of highs and lows, of unexpected turns, and the constant quest to find balance amidst the chaos. There were still days when memories of that wedding haunted me, the echo of laughter, the chill of the water, the heavy gaze of pity and amusement. But now, they were just pieces of a larger puzzle. Each moment, whether triumphant or painful, had contributed to the mosaic of who I was becoming. I learned that vulnerability was not something to be feared or hidden away. It was the raw material from which true strength was forged. In the quiet moments, when I sat alone on my back porch, I often reflected on the unlikely chain of events that had set me on this path. A single, catastrophic day had led to a cascade of experiences that redefined my understanding of resilience, community, and the importance of embracing every part of myself, flaws, failures, and all. I no longer saw that day as the end of something, but as the beginning of a journey toward a richer, more authentic life. As I continue to navigate the winding path of recovery and self-discovery, I remain ever grateful for the painful, yet transformative, lessons that life has thrown my way. Each day is a reminder that even in our most vulnerable moments, there is a spark of hope, a chance to rebuild, and an opportunity to share our light with the world. And while I know there will be more falls in the future, I also know that with every stumble, I am learning to rise stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more human. In the following months, my life took on a rhythm that was equal parts challenging and unexpectedly uplifting. I began to see that every misstep, every awkward encounter, was slowly interweaving itself into a broader tapestry of growth and redemption. I remember one brisk autumn afternoon when I decided to explore a new venture, documenting the stories of people who, like me, had faced public embarrassments or personal disasters and somehow turned those moments into catalysts for change. I had always believed that our most painful experiences carried hidden lessons, and I wanted to shine a light on that possibility for others who felt trapped by their past. I reached out to a few folks I met through my blog and support group, and soon enough, I found myself setting up interviews with individuals whose lives were as colorful and complex as the falling leaves outside. One of the first people I met was Dylan, an artist whose life had been upended when a devastating fire destroyed his home and nearly all of his belongings. We met at a small, dimly lit gallery where his paintings, vivid explosions of color and raw emotion, hung on the walls like proud badges of survival. I still recall the way his eyes lit up as he recounted how the fire, while catastrophic, forced him to strip away the superfluous and rediscover his core passion for art. "I lost everything that day," Dylan said softly, his voice tinged with both sorrow and a fierce determination. "But in the midst of the ashes, I found a spark that changed my life. I started painting not what I had lost, but what I could create from the ruins." His words resonated deeply with me, reminding me that our failures don't define us. They refine us. Driving back from that meeting, I couldn't help but reflect on my own journey. I thought about the wedding day that had once seemed like the nadir of my existence, and how, over time, that raw, unfiltered moment had transformed into something meaningful. I had learned to appreciate the unpredictability of life, understanding that every fall was just another opportunity to stand up a little taller. My drone, once a symbol of technical perfection, had become a metaphor for the soaring highs and unexpected dips that characterized my path. One evening, as I was editing the footage from one of my early interviews, I received a call from Emily. Her voice, gentle and encouraging, carried news that made my heart race with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. "Chris, there's a local arts festival next month," she explained, "and they're looking for speakers who can talk about turning personal setbacks into creative breakthroughs. I think your story, and maybe even your documentary idea, would really resonate with people there." The suggestion was both exhilarating and terrifying. Public speaking had always been a source of anxiety for me, but the thought of sharing my journey with a wider audience also felt like a natural extension of the healing I had been experiencing. That night, I lay awake, the soft hum of the city outside my window mingling with the rapid beat of my thoughts. I imagined standing on a small stage, speaking to a room filled with strangers who might one day become friends, all connected by the shared understanding that life rarely goes as planned. I thought of my sister's gentle smile that morning over coffee, the kind of look that said, "We're in this together," and of Jake's light-hearted jokes that reminded me that humor could be found even in the darkest moments. The next day, I made a decision. I would accept the invitation to speak at the festival. I started preparing a talk that was honest and raw, a narrative that didn't shy away from the ugly parts of my past. I wrote and rewrote my speech, trying to capture the essence of vulnerability and resilience. I rehearsed in front of the mirror until the lines felt less like a recitation and more like an authentic sharing of my soul. On the day of the festival, I arrived early at the community center where the event was being held. The venue buzzed with energy, a mix of chatter, soft music, and the rustling of promotional banners. I spotted familiar faces from my support group, as well as new ones, all gathered in anticipation of stories that could change lives. I found a quiet corner backstage where I took a moment to breathe deeply, steadying my nerves. I closed my eyes and reminded myself that every scar, every fall, had led me to this very moment. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding me before I adjusted to the warmth of the spotlight. I saw a sea of faces, some curious, others empathetic, and I knew that here, in this room, I was not alone. I began to speak, my voice trembling at first, but gradually gaining strength with each word. I recounted that fateful wedding day, the moment of humiliation by the pond, the echo of Rachel's urging, and the long, painful hours that followed as I grappled with my shattered self-image. I shared how, through therapy, late-night journal sessions, and the unexpected kindness of strangers, I had discovered that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a pathway to true connection. As I spoke, I could see nods of understanding, eyes that sparkled with unshed tears, and even smiles that broke through the tension. In that moment, I realized that by embracing my own imperfection, I was inviting others to do the same. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, a thunderous affirmation that our shared struggles could indeed be transformed into collective strength. After the session, people lingered, approaching me with words of gratitude and encouragement. A young woman with tear-stained cheeks said, "I've been so afraid of failing that I almost never tried anything new. Hearing your story gave me the courage to take a risk." Another man, his voice choked with emotion, added, "Thank you for showing us that even when we fall, we can rise again, stronger than before." These moments of connection filled me with a profound sense of purpose. I realized that what had once felt like a crippling embarrassment was now a bridge to countless lives. Proof that our darkest moments could, in fact, be the birth of our brightest selves. In the days that followed, I continued to speak at various local events, each time feeling a little more at ease with my own story. I expanded my documentary project, collecting stories from people who had experienced their own public mishaps, and using those narratives to weave a tapestry of resilience. The process was cathartic, and I found that every interview, every shared tear and laugh, enriched my understanding of what it meant to be human. I began to receive emails from readers of my blog who had found solace in my words, some even sharing their own stories of humiliation and the slow, painful road to recovery. Each message was a reminder that our experiences, no matter how personal or painful, held the potential to inspire others. I started to feel a sense of community, a network of souls bound together by the recognition that we were all imperfect and beautifully flawed. As summer turned to early autumn, I took another brave step. I organized a small gathering, a casual meetup for people who had attended my sessions or read my blog. It was held in a cozy loft downtown, filled with soft music, warm lights, and a palpable air of shared vulnerability. Over plates of comfort food and cups of steaming coffee, strangers became friends as we exchanged stories, laughed at our follies, and celebrated our small victories. In that space, I realized that the pain I once carried alone had multiplied into a collective strength that could transform lives. Through it all, I kept flying my drone, not as a tool to capture perfect images, but as a metaphor for my own journey. Every time it took to the sky, I was reminded of that tumultuous wedding day, the way it soared high despite the unpredictable winds, and how sometimes the most beautiful views come after the hardest flights. Each flight, each shaky takeoff and landing, was a lesson in embracing imperfection and finding beauty in the unexpected. As I sit here now, reflecting on all that has happened, I feel an overwhelming gratitude for the twists and turns that life has thrown my way. I no longer see my past as a series of failures, but as a mosaic of moments that, together, have made me who I am today. A man who understands that vulnerability is not a flaw, but a strength. That every fall is simply a prelude to a more resilient rise. And that our stories, no matter how raw or painful, have the power to connect, heal, and inspire. I continued to move forward day by day with a quiet determination that surprised even me. I found that as the seasons shifted from the crisp cool of early autumn into the mellow days of winter, my inner world transformed alongside the changing landscape. The gatherings, the live sessions, and the steady influx of messages on my blog had woven themselves into the fabric of my everyday life. Each morning I awoke with a sense of renewed purpose, even if the memories of that chaotic wedding day still whispered in the corners of my mind. I learned to meet them with a gentle smile and a nod of understanding, accepting that they were an intrinsic part of who I was. One evening, as a soft rain tapped against the window pane of my small apartment, I sat by my desk, revisiting the countless stories I had gathered over the months. The blog had become more than just a repository of personal pain. It was now a living mosaic of shared vulnerability, hope, and the messy beauty of human experience. I read through a particularly poignant message from a reader who had once been paralyzed by fear of failure, the words echoing my own struggles. That message, full of raw honesty and tentative hope, reminded me that each scar, each moment of public embarrassment, could be transformed into a story of resilience. I felt a warmth spreading inside me, a confirmation that the painful journey I had traversed was not in vain. I had also started to explore new creative outlets. Inspired by the metaphor of my drone, a machine that once symbolized technical precision but now carried the deeper meaning of unexpected highs and inevitable falls, I began to experiment with videography. I paired snippets of my drone footage with recordings of my spoken word reflections, trying to capture the essence of turning vulnerability into art. During these quiet, creative sessions, I often lost track of time, completely absorbed in the act of creation. It was as if every shaky frame, every imperfect take, carried its own beauty, mirroring the way I had learned to find grace in my own imperfections. The community around me grew stronger as well. I organized small workshops where people could come together, share their experiences, and learn from one another. At one such gathering held in a modest community hall, I remember the air being thick with emotion. People of all ages and backgrounds sat in a loose circle, some visibly nervous, others carrying quiet confidence born out of their own struggles. One woman, with tear-stained cheeks and trembling hands, recounted how a public misstep had once led her to lose her job, only for that very moment to become the turning point that sparked her journey toward a new career and renewed self-belief. Her voice, both fragile and resolute, filled the room with a tangible sense of hope. I listened, deeply moved, knowing that every shared story stitched us together in a tapestry of common human experience. Meanwhile, on a more personal note, I found my relationship with Emily deepening in unexpected ways. Our initial connection, forged in the safe space of shared vulnerability, gradually blossomed into something more profound. One chilly winter evening, after one of our long walks through the city streets, illuminated by soft, glowing streetlights, Emily reached out and took my hand. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic declaration, just a quiet moment of connection that said more than any words could. I remember thinking that in her gentle touch, I felt the promise of a new beginning, a future where the scars of the past could coexist with the hope of tomorrow. Yet, even as I embraced these new chapters, there were days when the weight of that wedding day would catch me off guard. On particularly quiet nights, I would lie awake, listening to the distant hum of the city, and feel the echo of every embarrassing laugh and every whispered remark. Those moments of doubt were like unwelcome visitors, but I had learned to acknowledge them without letting them define me. I would remind myself that each moment of humiliation had also been a lesson, a catalyst for growth that ultimately led me to a more authentic version of myself. I also continued to fly my drone, a ritual that had become both a meditation and a celebration of life's unpredictability. Each flight was a quiet dance with the wind, sometimes smooth, sometimes turbulent, but always a reminder that the sky was vast and full of possibilities. As I navigated the aerial views of the city, I often thought of the many lives unfolding beneath, each one a story of triumph, struggle, and unexpected beauty. These moments of quiet reflection, high above the familiar streets, allowed me to see my own journey in a broader context, a single thread in the vast tapestry of human experience, interwoven with countless others. With every new project, every shared story, and every genuine smile from a fellow traveler on this unpredictable path, I felt the old wounds slowly closing, replaced by a quiet resilience that no longer feared the fall. I came to understand that vulnerability, rather than being a weakness, was the very source of our strength. It was what connected us, made us human, and allowed us to rebuild, time and again, from the fragments of our past. As winter began to loosen its grip and hints of spring emerged in the soft bloom of early flowers, I looked forward with cautious optimism. My journey was far from over, and I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments that would test the limits of my resolve. But I had also learned that each stumble, each unexpected drop, was an integral part of the process, a necessary step towards a life lived fully and honestly. The lessons I had gathered, the connections I had forged, and the art I had created from my pain were now a part of me, shaping the person I was becoming. In that moment of quiet reflection, I felt a deep gratitude for every twist and turn that had led me here. I understood now that even the most humiliating moments held the power to transform us, to reveal hidden strengths, and to build bridges of empathy between souls. I resolved to continue embracing my imperfections, to keep flying high, even when the winds threatened to knock me down, and to share my journey with anyone who might find solace in knowing that they were not alone. And so, as I close this chapter of reflection, I am filled with a cautious yet undeniable hope. Hope that every fall will be met with a resilient rise, that every scar will tell a story of survival, and that in the vast, unpredictable sky of life, we will all find our own unique way to soar. In the quiet aftermath of that transformative period, I found that life continued to surprise me in ways I had never imagined. I had reached a point where every day felt like a fresh canvas, a blank page upon which I could paint my evolving story. I started venturing into new territories, both creatively and emotionally. that challenged me to step beyond the safe confines of my past. One brisk morning, I woke with a sudden impulse to explore a long-forgotten passion: music. I dusted off an old guitar that had been tucked away in a corner of my apartment for years, its strings silent testimony to dreams left behind. With hesitant fingers, I strummed a few chords, and though the notes were rough and unpolished at first, there was a strange comfort in the raw sound that emerged. It was as if the music was echoing my own imperfections, and in that honesty, I found a strange kind of beauty. I began attending local open mic nights, not to perform for applause or recognition, but to share my story in the language of song. Every performance was a leap into vulnerability, each note a reminder that life, much like music, is about embracing the imperfect moments. I remember one evening in particular. The venue was small and intimate, with soft lights and a quiet audience that listened with rapt attention. As I sang about my journey, from the humiliating fall at my sister's wedding to the long, winding road of self-discovery, the room seemed to vibrate with a collective understanding. Strangers approached me afterwards, sharing their own tales of setbacks and triumphs, and I realized that in our shared vulnerability, we all found solace and strength. Meanwhile, my creative endeavors continued to intertwine with every aspect of my life. I expanded the documentary project, now more ambitious than ever, by reaching out to people whose stories were as raw as mine. Each interview, whether with a young artist overcoming self-doubt or an elder whose life had been marked by both loss and resilience, added another thread to the intricate tapestry I was weaving. These sessions were not just about capturing stories. They were about celebrating the human spirit in its most unguarded form. I found that the process of listening, truly listening, to someone's pain and their subsequent healing was both humbling and exhilarating. I also deepened my connection with Emily, whose steady presence had become a lighthouse in the turbulent sea of my emotions. Our relationship grew organically, built on mutual respect, shared vulnerabilities, and countless quiet moments where words were unnecessary. One rainy afternoon, while we sat together watching the gentle patter of raindrops against the window, Emily turned to me and said, "I never imagined that all the chaos and hurt could lead to something so beautiful. You've turned your pain into art, and that inspires me every day." Her words, simple yet profound, reaffirmed my belief that every scar was a story worth telling, and every fall a precursor to a stronger rise. As winter gave way to the soft promise of spring, I began to see a shift in the way I viewed my past. The once unbearable weight of humiliation had slowly transformed into a mosaic of experiences that defined who I was. I no longer dreaded the memories of that fateful wedding day. Instead, I embraced them as essential chapters in my narrative. Each setback had taught me resilience. Each misstep had revealed a hidden strength, and every moment of vulnerability had connected me more deeply with the world around me. I started planning a larger project, a live, interactive storytelling event that would bring together voices from across the community to share their journeys of imperfection and hope. The idea was to create a space where no one felt alone in their struggles, where the raw truths of our lives could be celebrated rather than hidden away. I envisioned a night filled with music, spoken word, and open dialogue, a collective catharsis that would remind us all of the beauty inherent in our flaws. Preparation for the event was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. I spent long nights coordinating with local artists, venues, and fellow survivors who were eager to share their stories. The more I worked on it, the more I realized that this project was not just about healing my own wounds, but about weaving a fabric of empathy that could hold us all together. I encountered moments of doubt along the way, fears that my own story was too raw, too painful to be a beacon for others, But each time, I recalled the gentle encouragement of strangers, the tearful thanks of someone whose life had been touched by my words, and the unspoken bond that connected us in our shared humanity. The day of the event arrived with a cool, clear sky and a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. I stood backstage, heart pounding, as I watched the audience slowly fill the intimate space of the community center. There was a collective energy that seemed to hum with the promise of shared understanding and renewal. As I took the stage to introduce the night's program, I felt a deep calm settle over me, a quiet confidence born from knowing that every twist in my journey had led me to this very moment. Speaking into the microphone, I recounted the story of my fall, not just the physical tumble, but the emotional plunge that had forced me to confront my fears. I spoke of the icy water, the echoes of laughter, and the painful solitude that followed. But I also spoke of the gentle hands that helped me up, the quiet mornings of reflection, and the transformative power of embracing my vulnerabilities. As I shared these moments, I could see the audience leaning in, their eyes reflecting a mix of empathy, understanding, and hope. By the end of the night, as the event drew to a close and the audience lingered in a warm, lingering silence, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection. In that space, among strangers who had become kindred spirits, I understood that our shared imperfections were not burdens to bear, but badges of honor that united us in our humanity. Walking off the stage, I was greeted by Emily, whose embrace and whispered words of pride melted away any lingering doubts. In that moment, I realized that the journey was far from over. It was an ever-evolving dance between light and shadow, a celebration of every fall and every rise. As I stand on the threshold of what feels like a new chapter, I can't help but reflect on the twists that have led me here. Every misstep, every humiliating moment, has become a stepping stone toward a more authentic self. I remember the cold shock of that wedding day, the icy water that stripped me of my dignity, and the echoes of laughter that once cut me deep. Now, those memories shimmer with a bittersweet clarity, a reminder that the pain we endure can carve out space for growth and resilience. I've learned that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but a source of strength, a raw material that shapes us into the people we're meant to be. Meanwhile, it seems that those who reveled in my downfall are now reaping the bitter fruits of their own cruelty. I recently learned that a particular relative, someone who had long taken pleasure in my misfortunes and mocked every stumble, has seen his world unravel. His arrogance and callous laughter, once so satisfying to his own ego, have led him down a path of isolation and regret. While I don't wish ill on anyone, I can't help but feel that his suffering is a natural consequence of the bitterness he spread. It's a harsh reminder that the hurt we inflict on others often circles back, leaving us to face our own shadows. I continue to embrace each day with a cautious optimism, knowing that every fall is followed by the chance to rise again. The journey hasn't been easy, but I now understand that our scars are not marks of defeat. They are badges of survival, evidence of our capacity to rebuild and to transform pain into art, connection, and hope. I keep flying my drone, not just as a tool, but as a symbol of how we can soar high, even when the winds are against us. Every shaky takeoff and every turbulent landing is a part of the flight that makes the view all the more breathtaking. My story remains open-ended, much like the unpredictable sky. I'm still writing new chapters, still exploring the depths of creativity, empathy, and love. And I invite you, my friends, to join me in this conversation. Have you experienced a moment when life turned your deepest humiliation into an unexpected triumph? What lessons have your own falls taught you? Share your stories, your thoughts, and your insights. Let's build a community where our vulnerabilities connect us rather than divide us. Remember, every time we choose to rise after a fall, we not only reclaim our power, but also inspire someone else to do the same. So, what's your story?